The morning mist clung to the ancient oak trees, surrounding sprawling estate like secrets refusing to be revealed. Detective Inspector Sarah adjusted her thick wool coat against the October chill as she stepped out of the unmarked police vehicle. Behind her, a team of specialized Royal Protection officers moved with practiced silence across the gravel driveway, their breath visible in small puffs of vapor. Sarah had been with the Metropolitan Police for 15 years, but this was her first assignment involving the royal family's inner circle. The call had come at dawn, urgent and cryptic. Reports of suspicious activity at the Queen Consort's private residence had prompted an immediate investigation. What made this case particularly sensitive was the timing. Just 6 months after the late Queen Elizabeth II's passing, when emotions were still raw and the monarchy was navigating unprecedented changes. The estate stretched before them like something from a period drama. Manicured gardens extended in all directions, punctuated by marble fountains and carefully maintained rose beds. The main house, a Georgian masterpiece of honey-colored stone, stood 3 stories tall with ivy creeping up its eastern wall. Diamond-paned windows reflected the early morning light, giving the building an almost ethereal quality. As Sarah approached the main entrance, she noticed the subtle signs of recent disturbance. Fresh tire tracks in the soft earth beside the formal driveway suggested vehicles had been here recently, yet the house appeared empty. The Queen Consort was currently at Balmoral, according to the official schedules they had reviewed during the brief drive from London. Detective Sergeant James Murphy fell into step beside her, his weathered face serious beneath graying hair. "The groundskeeper called it in around 5 this morning," he said quietly. "Claims he saw lights moving through the house around midnight, but when he investigated this morning, everything was locked up tight." Sarah nodded, pulling out her notebook. The groundskeeper, Thomas, had worked on the estate for over 20 years. He was not someone prone to flights of fancy or false alarms. If Thomas said something was amiss, there was good reason to take it seriously. They were met at the front door by Chief Inspector Harold, a tall man with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. His presence indicated just how seriously the authorities were taking this potential breach of royal security. "What do we know so far?" Sarah asked as led them through the grand foyer. Crystal chandeliers caught the morning light streaming through tall windows, casting rainbow patterns across marble floors that had been walked by generations of nobility. "Initial sweep shows no signs of forced entry," replied, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "However, the security system was mysteriously disabled between 11:30 p.m. and 3 a.m. last night. That's a 4.5-hour window where we have no electronic record of what happened here." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. Professional criminals didn't typically target royal residences. The security was too sophisticated, the consequences too severe. This suggested either extraordinary desperation or inside knowledge. They moved through rooms that spoke of understated elegance and careful curation. Each space reflected decades of refined taste, from the library lined with leather-bound first editions to the drawing room where oil paintings of long-dead aristocrats gazed down from gilded frames. Everything appeared to be in its proper place, which somehow made the violation feel more unsettling. It was in the Queen Consort's private study that they found the first tangible evidence of intrusion. Sarah's trained eye immediately noticed the subtle displacement of items on the mahogany desk. Papers had been moved and not quite returned to their original positions. A valuable paperweight, a gift from the late Queen, sat several inches from its usual spot, evidenced by a slight difference in the dust pattern beneath. "Someone was definitely here," Murphy observed, photographing the desk from multiple angles. "They were careful but not careful enough." Sarah examined the room more closely. Built-in bookcases lined 3 walls, filled with an eclectic mix of literature, history, and personal memoirs. A magnificent Persian rug covered most of the hardwood floor, and fresh flowers in a crystal vase suggested the room was used regularly. What caught her attention was a small safe, barely visible behind a sliding panel that had been left slightly ajar. "The safe," she said, pointing toward the concealed compartment. "It's been accessed recently." Approached with measured steps. As someone who had overseen royal security for over a decade, he knew the protocols surrounding such discoveries. "We'll need to contact the palace immediately. Any examination of personal property belonging to a member of the royal family requires explicit permission." While they waited for authorization, Sarah continued her examination of the study. Experience had taught her that initial impressions were crucial. Scenes changed as more people became involved, evidence could be inadvertently disturbed, and the story told by undisturbed evidence was often the most honest. Near the fireplace, she noticed something that made her pulse quicken. On the Persian rug, barely visible against the intricate pattern, were several small fragments of what appeared to be glass or crystal. She knelt carefully, using a magnifying glass to examine them more closely. The fragments caught the light with an unusual brilliance, not ordinary glass, but something far more precious. "James," she called softly, "I need you to see this." Murphy joined her beside the fireplace, following her gaze to the tiny fragments scattered across the rug. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think someone dropped something valuable," Sarah replied. "Something they were very eager to retrieve, judging by how thoroughly they searched for pieces." The fragments were photographed and carefully collected, each one placed in a separate evidence bag. Sarah made detailed notes about their location and the pattern of their distribution, which suggested someone had been standing near the fireplace when whatever they were holding had been damaged. As they worked, Thomas arrived at the front door. The groundskeeper was a robust man in his 60s with soil-stained hands and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent outdoors. He moved through the house with obvious familiarity, his concern evident in every gesture. "I've been caring for this place since before the Queen Consort lived here," he said, his voice carrying a slight Welsh accent. "I know every sound, every shadow. What I saw last night wasn't natural." Sarah settled into one of the comfortable chairs in the morning room to conduct her interview. Thomas sat across from her, his cap clutched nervously in his hands. Through the windows behind him, she could see gardeners beginning their daily work, apparently unaware of the investigation taking place inside. "Tell me exactly what you saw," she said gently. Thomas took a deep breath. "I was doing my evening rounds, checking the greenhouse heaters and making sure the garden gates were secure. It was around midnight when I noticed lights moving through the house. Not the normal lighting, mind you, but torch lights, moving from room to room like someone was searching for something." "Did you see any vehicles?" There was a dark car parked behind the east wing, where it couldn't be seen from the main road. Looked expensive, but I couldn't make out the make or model from where I was standing." Sarah made careful notes. "What did you do then?" "I thought about calling the police straight away, but I wanted to be certain. You don't make accusations lightly when it comes to the royal family. So I waited and watched. The lights moved through the house for nearly an hour before everything went dark again." "Did you see anyone leave?" Thomas shook his head. "The mist was getting thicker, and I lost sight of the car. But this morning when I came to check, there were tire tracks in the soft ground behind the east wing, and the gravel near the servants' entrance had been disturbed." After completing the interview, Sarah joined the rest of the team for a more thorough examination of the house. They moved systematically through each room, documenting anything that seemed out of place or unusual. The servants' quarters on the ground floor showed no signs of disturbance, nor did the formal dining room or the conservatory. It was in the Queen Consort's private bedroom that they made their next significant discovery. Hidden behind an apparently decorative panel in the dressing room was a second, smaller safe. Unlike the one in the study, this safe had been forced open with professional skill. The lock mechanism had been carefully drilled out, leaving minimal damage to the surrounding metal. "Whoever did this knew what they were looking for," observed grimly. "This isn't the work of common burglars." Sarah examined the safe's interior with her flashlight. Empty except for a few scattered documents, it had obviously been thoroughly searched. However, caught in a corner where the intruder had missed, it was a small piece of paper with elegant handwriting. The fragment was barely an inch square, but the words visible were enough to make Sarah's breath catch. "Jewels must never be found," was all that remained legible, but it was written in what appeared to be the late Queen's distinctive handwriting. The implication sent a chill through everyone present. Whatever had been stolen from this safe was connected to the late Queen Elizabeth II, and the theft had been carried out by someone with intimate knowledge of the estate's layout and security systems. As word of the break-in spread through the necessary official channels, Sarah found herself reflecting on the complexity of the situation. Royal residences were supposed to be inviolate, protected by layers of security that made such breaches nearly impossible. Yet someone had walked through these defenses as if they didn't exist, searching for something specific and valuable enough to risk the severe consequences of such an action. The afternoon brought a steady stream of officials from various government departments. Security experts examined the disabled alarm system, finding evidence of sophisticated electronic interference rather than crude tampering. Forensic specialists dusted for fingerprints and collected DNA samples, though they held little hope of finding anything useful given the obvious professionalism of the intrusion. By evening, as Sarah prepared her initial report, the picture that emerged was both puzzling and deeply concerning. Someone with extensive knowledge of the estate and access to professional equipment had carried out a targeted theft, focusing specifically on items connected to the late queen. The fragments of precious stone found in the study suggested that whatever was stolen was not only valuable, but also fragile, possibly jewelry that had been damaged during the hurried search. The most troubling aspect was the personal nature of the violation. This was not a random crime, but something far more intimate and potentially damaging to the royal family's reputation. In the months following Queen Elizabeth II's death, public attention remained intensely focused on anything connected to her legacy and the transition of the monarchy. As Sarah drove back to London through the darkening countryside, she couldn't shake the feeling that this investigation would lead them into territory far more complex and sensitive than a simple burglary. The late Queen's handwritten note about jewels that must never be found suggested secrets that some people were willing to commit serious crimes to uncover. The lights of London appeared ahead as her phone rang with news that would deepen the mystery further. Forensic analysis of the crystal fragments had revealed something unexpected. They were not from a piece of jewelry at all, but from what appeared to be a very old and very valuable decorative object, possibly dating back several centuries. The investigation was just beginning, and already it was clear that nothing about this case would be simple or straightforward. The following morning brought Sarah back to New Scotland Yard with more questions than answers. The forensic report on the crystal fragments lay open on her desk, its contents more intriguing than she had anticipated. Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, the department's leading expert on precious materials, had worked through the night to analyze the recovered pieces. The fragments are from Venetian glass, circa 1650, Dr. Harrison explained as she joined Sarah in the cramped conference room that had been designated for the investigation. But this isn't ordinary decorative glass. The composition includes materials that were extraordinarily expensive in that period: gold leaf, crushed pearls, and what appears to be powdered sapphire mixed into the glass itself. Sarah studied the enlarged photographs of the fragments under microscopic examination. Even in pieces, the craftsmanship was evident. What kind of object would have been made from such materials? Given the thickness and the curve of these pieces, I believe we're looking at fragments from a ceremonial goblet or chalice, something created for a very special occasion or as a gift between royal houses. The workmanship is exceptional. This would have been made by master craftsmen, probably in Venice, for someone of extraordinary importance. The implications were staggering. If such a valuable historical artifact had been in possession and was now missing, the theft represented not just a crime but a loss of cultural heritage. Sarah made notes as Dr. Harrison continued her analysis. "There's something else," the forensic expert added, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I found traces of organic material embedded in one of the fragments, what appears to be dried blood, quite old, possibly dating to the same period as the glass itself." Sarah looked up sharply. "Blood. It's been there for centuries, not from the recent break-in. This suggests the goblet may have been damaged previously and repaired, or possibly that it was involved in some kind of ceremonial or religious ritual where blood was present." The mystery deepened with each new piece of evidence. Sarah spent the morning coordinating with various departments, trying to trace the history of objects that might have been in the Queen Consort's possession. The Royal Collection Trust, which maintained records of artwork and artifacts owned by the royal family, proved to be a valuable but frustrating resource. The Trust's chief archivist was a precise woman in her 70s who had devoted her life to cataloging the monarchy's vast collection of treasures. She received Sarah in her office at James's Palace, surrounded by filing cabinets and reference books that contained the documented history of thousands of priceless objects. "The challenge," Mrs. explained as she consulted leather-bound ledgers, "is that not everything in royal possession is formally part of the royal collection. Family members often inherit personal items that have never been officially cataloged, particularly pieces that pass down through female lines or come from private bequests. Sarah showed her the photographs of the crystal fragments. Mrs. examined them through a jeweler's loupe, her expression growing increasingly intrigued. "This is definitely 17th century Venetian work," she confirmed. "The technique of incorporating crushed gems into the glass was pioneered by the masters around that time, but I don't have any record of such a piece in our official collections." "Could it have been a personal possession of the late queen?" Mrs. paused thoughtfully. "It's certainly possible. Queen Elizabeth II inherited many items from various relatives that were never formally. The royal family's private possessions are distinct from the official royal collection, and much less documentation exists about them." They spent the afternoon reviewing historical records, looking for any mention of significant Venetian glasswork connected to the British royal family. What they discovered was a tantalizing trail of references that seemed to point toward a specific piece with a remarkable history. "Here," Mrs. said, pointing to an entry in a 19th century inventory. "A ceremonial chalice, Venetian, given to King Charles I by the Doge of Venice in 1638. It disappeared during the English Civil War, presumably lost when the royal treasures were dispersed." Sarah felt a surge of excitement, but it wasn't lost. "Apparently not. Look at this entry from Queen Victoria's time." Mrs. turned several pages to show a brief notation in faded ink. "A Venetian chalice was returned to the royal family in 1887 by an Italian nobleman whose family had preserved it for over 2 centuries. It was described as being of great historical significance and beauty." The trail went cold after that entry. There was no further mention of the chalice in the official records, suggesting it had remained in private hands within the royal family. The timing of its return during Queen Victoria's reign meant it could easily have passed through several generations without formal documentation. Late that afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected call that would change the direction of her investigation entirely. Chief Inspector's voice was tense as he delivered news that sent a chill through the entire team. "We've had a development," he said without preamble. "A body was found in a hotel room in Mayfair this morning. The deceased is Blackwood, a well-known dealer in historical artifacts and antiques. He was discovered with materials related to 17th century royal artifacts in his possession." Sarah grabbed her coat immediately. This hotel, where Blackwood had been staying, represented one of London's most exclusive establishments. The fact that he had been found there suggested either considerable wealth or connections that extended into society's upper reaches. The hotel room told a story of desperate searching and violent confrontation. Blackwood, a thin man in his 60s, lay near the window with obvious signs of having been struck down during a struggle. Papers were scattered across the elegant furnishings, and a laptop computer had been smashed against the wall. Detective Chief Inspector Stone from the Metropolitan Police's Serious Crime Division was already coordinating the scene when Sarah arrived. Stone was known for her methodical approach to complex cases and her ability to see connections that others missed. "What do we know about Blackwood?" Sarah asked as they examined the scattered papers. "He's been dealing in high-end historical artifacts for 30 years, Stone replied. Reputation was generally clean, though there were whispers about his willingness to work in gray areas when it came to provenance. His client list included some very wealthy and very private collectors." Among the papers were photocopies of historical documents related to Venetian glasswork, including several references to the same ceremonial chalice that Sarah and Mrs. had discovered in the royal archives. More significantly, there was a handwritten note in Blackwood's careful script that made Sarah's pulse quicken. "Meeting confirmed for midnight. She promises access to the private collection. The Venetian piece must be authenticated before any transaction can proceed." The implications were clear but disturbing. Blackwood had been planning to examine or possibly purchase items from someone's private collection, presumably including the missing chalice. The timing of the meeting matched perfectly with the break-in at his estate. Stone showed Sarah a leather portfolio that had been found beneath Blackwood's body. Inside were detailed photographs of various historical artifacts, including what appeared to be the complete, undamaged chalice that they now knew only in fragments. The photographs showed an object of breathtaking beauty, a goblet of deep blue glass shot through with gold veins. standing about 8 inches tall with an ornate stem decorated with precious metals. He was definitely planning to deal with the chalice, Sarah observed. These photographs show it in perfect condition, which means they were taken before it was broken during the theft. The question is whether Blackwood was the buyer or the seller, Stone replied grimly, and whether his murder was connected to the break-in or was a separate crime entirely. Further examination of Blackwood's effects revealed a sophisticated operation. His laptop, despite being damaged, yielded fragments of encrypted communications with individuals identified only by code names. Financial records showed several recent large transactions, including a deposit of £50,000 made just 2 days before his death. The hotel's security footage proved frustrating. Blackwood had been discreet about his movements, using service elevators and avoiding the main lobby when possible. However, the cameras did capture his return to the hotel around 11:30 p.m. on the night of the break-in, accompanied by a figure whose face remained carefully turned away from the cameras. Professional, Stone observed as they reviewed the footage. Whoever accompanied Blackwood knew exactly where the cameras were positioned and how to avoid them. As evening approached, Sarah found herself coordinating 2 parallel investigations that seemed increasingly likely to be connected. The break-in at estate and Blackwood's murder had occurred within hours of each other. Both involved the same historical artifact, and both showed signs of professional planning and execution. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Thomas, the groundskeeper from estate, called to report that he had remembered something important about the car he had seen on the night of the break-in. "I was walking past the spot this afternoon where it had been parked," he explained when Sarah met him at the estate. "The afternoon light was hitting the ground just right, and I could see tire impressions in the soft earth that I hadn't noticed before." The tire tracks told a compelling story. Forensic examination revealed that the vehicle had been a high-end sedan, possibly German, with specialized tires that were typically found on luxury or security vehicles. More importantly, analysis of soil samples from the treads indicated that the car had recently been driven on the specific type of limestone gravel used in the courtyards of several exclusive London hotels, including S. The same vehicle was present at both locations, Sarah concluded as she briefed her team that evening. Someone drove from estate to Blackwood's hotel on the same night, connecting the theft directly to his murder. The evidence was building toward a disturbing conclusion. The theft of the Venetian chalice had not been a random crime, but part of a larger scheme involving multiple parties. Blackwood's murder suggested that someone was willing to kill to protect their involvement in whatever illegal transaction had been planned. As Sarah prepared to leave the estate, Mrs. called with information that would prove crucial to understanding the full scope of what they were investigating. "I've been thinking about the chalice all day," the archivist said. "I made some additional inquiries with colleagues in other institutions, and I discovered something remarkable. The chalice isn't just historically significant, according to legend. It was used in a secret coronation ceremony during the English Civil War." Sarah felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to shift into new configurations. What kind of secret ceremony? The story goes that Charles I, knowing his reign was in jeopardy, used the chalice in a private ceremony to formally pass certain royal prerogatives to his son, the future Charles II. The ceremony was witnessed by only a handful of loyal supporters, and the chalice became a symbol of the continuity of the monarchy during the Commonwealth period. The historical significance was staggering. If the legend was true, the chalice represented more than just a beautiful artifact. It was a tangible link to one of the most turbulent periods in English history and the survival of the monarchy itself. "But here's what makes it truly extraordinary," Mrs. continued. "I found a reference suggesting that the chalice contained a hidden compartment, sealed within the stem, that supposedly held documents related to the secret ceremony. If those documents still exist and could be authenticated, they would be among the most valuable historical artifacts in existence." Sarah hung up the phone with her mind racing. The case had evolved from a simple burglary to something far more complex and significant. Someone had stolen an artifact that potentially contained centuries-old royal documents, murdered a dealer who was trying to facilitate its sale, and was now presumably attempting to access whatever secrets the chalice had hidden for over 3 centuries. As she drove back to London through the dark countryside, Sarah realized that they were no longer just investigating a theft and murder. They were pursuing someone who might be on the verge of uncovering state secrets that had been hidden since the time of the English Civil War. The revelation about the chalice's hidden compartment transformed the investigation into something approaching a national security matter. Sarah arrived at New Scotland Yard the following morning to find that overnight, the case had attracted attention from the highest levels of government. Waiting in her office was Sir Edmund, a distinguished gentleman in his 70s, who introduced himself as a representative of the Cabinet Office. "Detective Inspector," Sir Edmund said, settling into the chair across from her desk with the careful movements of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. "I'm here because this investigation has implications that extend far beyond ordinary criminal matters." Sarah studied his weathered face, noting the intelligence in his pale blue eyes and the way he chose his words with diplomatic precision. "What kind of implications?" "The chalice you're seeking contains what we believe to be original documents from 1649, including what may be Charles I's final testament and instructions for the restoration of the monarchy. If authenticated, these papers would provide unprecedented insight into one of the most crucial periods in British history. They could also, depending on their content, raise uncomfortable questions about the legitimacy of certain constitutional arrangements." The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a physical burden. She was no longer just pursuing criminals, but potentially dealing with documents that could influence contemporary political discussions about the monarchy's role and authority. Sir Edmund continued, "We have reason to believe that the theft was commissioned by someone with specific knowledge of the chalice's significance. This suggests either an academic with specialized historical knowledge or a collector willing to pay enormous sums for unique artifacts." "How much are we talking about?" Sarah asked. Conservative estimates suggest the complete chalice, with authenticated 17th century royal documents, could be worth 20 to 30 million pounds to the right buyer. However, the real value to certain collectors might be incalculable. The morning brought new evidence that supported Sir Edmund's concerns. Analysis of Blackwood's financial records revealed that he had been contacted 3 months earlier by someone using the pseudonym Cavalier, a reference that historians would immediately associate with supporters of Charles I during the English Civil War. The encrypted communications recovered from Blackwood's damaged laptop were finally decoded, revealing a sophisticated network of collectors and dealers specializing in royal artifacts with questionable provenance. Most disturbing were messages indicating that Cavalier possessed detailed floor plans of his estate and knew exactly where the chalice was kept. Detective Sergeant Murphy knocked on Sarah's door with news that would deepen the mystery further. "We've identified the vehicle from the tire tracks," he reported. "It's registered to Security Services, a private company that provides discreet protection for wealthy clients." Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. Someone hired professional security consultants to carry out the theft. It gets more interesting. His client list is confidential, but we've learned that they specialize in what they call acquisition security, protecting valuable items during transport or transfer. It's possible someone hired them believing they were providing legitimate security for a legal transaction. The investigation led them to offices in an unmarked building near Victoria Station. The company operated from behind heavy security doors, with no obvious signage indicating their presence. When Sarah and Murphy arrived with appropriate warrants, they found a sophisticated operation that clearly catered to clients who valued absolute discretion. Himself met them in the austere reception area. A former military officer with graying temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to command, he examined their credentials carefully before agreeing to discuss his company's recent activities. "We were contracted to provide secure transport for a valuable historical artifact," explained as he led them to his private office. The walls were lined with certificates and photographs showing him with various dignitaries and officials. The client represented themselves as acting on behalf of a private collector who had purchased the item legitimately. Sarah showed him photographs of the chalice and the estate. His expression remained professionally neutral, but she noticed a slight tightening around his eyes that suggested recognition. "Our team was told the item was being moved from a private residence to a secure facility for authentication before final sale." We were provided with detailed security information about the location and specific instructions about handling the artifact with appropriate care. Who was your client? Hesitated, clearly weighing professional discretion against legal obligation. The contract was arranged through intermediaries. We never met the principal directly. Payment came through a Swiss bank transfer, which is not uncommon in our business. Murphy leaned forward. Did your team report anything unusual about the operation? Actually, yes. The team leader noted that when they accessed the artifact, it appeared to have been damaged, already broken when they found it. They collected all the pieces carefully and delivered them to the location as instructed. This revelation changed everything. If the chalice had already been broken before the theft, it suggested either previous mishandling or deliberate damage to access the hidden compartment. Sarah felt a growing sense of urgency as she realized that whoever had commissioned the theft might already have obtained the historical documents. Where did your team deliver the pieces? A warehouse facility in East London. The address was provided by the client, and our people confirmed delivery to an individual who presented appropriate identification and authorization codes. Sarah and Murphy exchanged glances. If the stolen artifacts had been delivered to a specific location, they might still have a chance to recover both the chalice fragments and any documents that had been hidden within them. The warehouse in East London occupied a nondescript industrial building that could have housed any number of legitimate businesses. When they arrived with a full forensic team, they found evidence of recent occupation but no trace of current activity. However, what they discovered inside painted a vivid picture of sophisticated historical analysis being conducted under secretive conditions. The main floor had been converted into a makeshift laboratory equipped with specialized tools for examining historical artifacts. High-powered magnifying equipment, chemical testing apparatus, and document preservation materials suggested someone had been conducting thorough analysis of fragile historical items. More significantly, they found fragments of the same Venetian glass scattered across a work table, along with small tools that had been used to carefully extract something from the chalice's stem. Nearby, a digital camera and specialized lighting equipment indicated that whatever had been found was being photographed and documented. They definitely accessed the hidden compartment, observed Dr. Harrison, who had joined the forensic team. She examined the glass fragments under her portable microscope. These pieces show tool marks where the stem was carefully opened. Someone with considerable skill took apart the chalice to reach whatever was hidden inside. Sarah studied the workspace, trying to reconstruct what had happened. The arrangement of tools and materials suggested methodical, unhurried work. Whoever had been here felt secure enough to take their time with the delicate process of extracting the hidden documents. Near the back of the warehouse, they discovered something that made Sarah's pulse quicken. A small office area contained photocopying equipment and what appeared to be a document scanner capable of creating high-resolution digital images. More importantly, the trash bin yielded several partial sheets of heavy parchment that had clearly been damaged during the extraction process. Dr. Harrison examined the parchment fragments with obvious excitement. This is definitely 17th century paper, and the ink appears to be iron gall, which was standard for important documents of that period. These fragments contain text in what appears to be formal Latin, typical of official royal documents. One legible fragment contained words that sent chills through everyone present. "I divine right and royal prerogative, we do hereby establish." The formal language and references to royal authority confirmed that they were dealing with documents of extraordinary historical significance. "We need to find who's been working here," Sarah said grimly. "They have original documents that could rewrite our understanding of 17th century English history." The investigation into the warehouse's rental history led to another layer of deception. The facility had been leased 6 months earlier by a company called Heritage Research Associates, using credentials that appeared legitimate but were actually sophisticated forgeries. Payment had been made in cash, and the individuals who signed the lease had provided false identification. However, security footage from nearby businesses yielded a crucial breakthrough. Camera feeds from the past week showed a pattern of activity at the warehouse, including the arrival and departure of several vehicles. Most significantly, they captured clear images of a woman in her 50s with distinctive silver hair who appeared to be supervising the operation. The woman's face was familiar to Sarah, though she couldn't immediately place where she had seen it. Running the images through facial recognition databases produced no immediate matches, suggesting either someone with no criminal record or someone skilled enough to avoid previous police attention. It was the Royal Collection archivist who provided the identification that broke the case wide open. When Sarah showed her the surveillance photographs, Mrs. reaction was immediate and shocked. "That's Dr. Victoria," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's one of the most respected historians specializing in the English Civil War period. She was a consultant for the Royal Collection for several years before she left to pursue private research." Sarah felt the final pieces of the puzzle falling into place. What kind of private research? She became obsessed with proving certain theories about the continuity of royal authority during the Commonwealth period. Her work was brilliant, but increasingly controversial. She believed there were hidden documents that would vindicate Charles I and prove that the execution of the king was constitutionally invalid. The motive became clear with devastating simplicity. Doctor hadn't stolen the chalice for money, but for the historical documents it contained. Her academic career had led her to believe that proof of her theories lay hidden in royal artifacts, and she had been willing to commit serious crimes to access that proof. "Where would she take the documents now?" Sarah asked. Mrs. considered carefully. "Victoria has a private research facility in Oxford. She's been working independently for the past 5 years, funded by grants from various historical societies and private donors interested in her work. If she's trying to authenticate and analyze the documents, that's where she would go." As the team prepared to travel to Oxford, Sir Edmund returned with additional information that elevated the stakes even further. Government historians had been researching the potential contents of Charles I's final testament, and their conclusions were disturbing. "If Doctor has found what we think she's found," Sir Edmund explained, "she possesses documents that could provide ammunition for contemporary Republican movements arguing against the monarchy. Alternatively, if the documents support her theories about royal divine right, they could be exploited by extremist groups seeking to undermine constitutional democracy." Sarah realized that they were racing against time, not just to solve a criminal case, but to prevent historical documents from being used to destabilize contemporary political institutions. The theft of an ancient chalice had evolved into a threat to modern British constitutional arrangements. The drive to Oxford through the late afternoon countryside gave Sarah time to reflect on how dramatically the investigation had expanded. What had begun as a routine burglary had revealed a complex conspiracy involving royal artifacts, secret historical documents, and ideological motivations that stretched back over 3 centuries. Dr. Victoria's research facility occupied a converted manor house on the outskirts of Oxford, surrounded by gardens that spoke of academic gentility and scholarly pursuit. However, as their convoy of police vehicles approached the main building, Sarah could see that the doctor's work had taken on an urgency that bordered on obsession. Lights blazed from every window despite the late hour, and through the main floor windows, they could see sophisticated document analysis equipment that rivaled anything found in major museums or archives. Doctor had clearly invested enormous resources in creating the perfect environment for examining and authenticating historical documents. The confrontation, when it came, was both anticlimactic and deeply emotional. Doctor answered the door herself, a woman whose silver hair framed an intelligent face marked by exhaustion and what appeared to be profound disappointment. She looked at the assembled police officers with the resigned expression of someone who had always known this moment would eventually arrive. "I suppose you've come about the chalice," she said quietly, stepping aside to allow them entry. Her voice carried the cultured accent of someone who had spent decades in academic circles, but there was an underlying tremor that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. Dr. Victoria led them into her study with the measured pace of someone who had finally reached the end of a long and difficult journey. The room was a scholar's paradise, lined with thousands of books on British history, constitutional law, and royal documentation. In the center, under carefully controlled lighting, lay the fragments of the Venetian chalice arranged on a felt-covered examination table. Sarah approached the table slowly, seeing for the first time the complete scope of what had been hidden for centuries. Beside the glass fragments were 3 pieces of parchment, yellowed with age but remarkably well preserved. Even from a distance, She could see the elegant calligraphy and official seals that marked them as genuine historical documents. "They're real," Doctor said softly, following Sarah's gaze. "Everything I theorized, everything I spent my career trying to prove, it's all there in Charles I's own hand." Sir Edmund stepped forward, his expression grave as he examined the documents without touching them. "Doctor, you understand the seriousness of your situation. These documents are national treasures, and their theft has resulted in at least one death." Doctor's face crumpled at the mention of Blackwood's murder. "Wasn't supposed to die. He was just helping me arrange for proper authentication when those men came to the hotel." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Sarah felt a chill of realization. What men? Who else is involved in this? "I hired security because I thought they were legitimate. But when started asking too many questions about provenance, other parties became interested. People who care nothing about historical truth but saw an opportunity for profit." The story that emerged over the next hour painted a picture of academic obsession that had spiraled tragically out of control. Doctor had spent years researching the location of Charles I's hidden testament, following clues through archives across Europe. When she finally traced the documents to the chalice in his private collection, she convinced herself that the historical significance justified any means necessary to access them. "I never intended for anyone to be harmed," she said, her hands trembling as she gestured toward the documents. "I just wanted the world to know the truth about what happened in 1649. These papers prove that Charles I had legal authority to transfer certain royal prerogatives to his son, maintaining constitutional continuity even during the Commonwealth period." Murphy examined the parchments through a magnifying glass, careful not to disturb their positioning. "What exactly do the documents say?" Doctor moved to a laptop computer where she had been transcribing and translating the Latin text. "The first document is Charles I's final testament, written in the Tower of London just days before his execution. It formally transfers the spiritual and temporal authority of the crown to the future Charles II, witnessed by 6 loyal peers." Sarah read over the translation, struggling to understand the legal implications of 17th-century constitutional language. "What does that mean practically?" "It means that legally, there was no interruption in royal authority during the Commonwealth period. Charles II was the legitimate king from the moment of his father's death, regardless of Parliament's actions. The restoration in 1660 wasn't the return of monarchy, but simply the recognition of royal authority that had never been legally interrupted." Sir Edmund's expression grew increasingly concerned as he absorbed the implications. These documents could be interpreted as either validating the monarchy's historical legitimacy or undermining the authority of Parliament to limit royal power, dangerous ammunition for contemporary political extremists on either side. "The second document," Doctor continued, "is even more significant. It's a secret agreement between Charles I and several European monarchs, pledging mutual support for the principle of divine right kingship. If authenticated, it shows that the English Civil War was part of a broader European conflict over the nature of royal authority." The third document proved to be the most explosive of all. Written entirely in Charles I's own hand, it contained his personal reflections on the nature of kingship and his belief that royal authority came directly from God, not from the consent of Parliament or the people. "This is dynamite," Sir Edmund murmured, studying the translation. "Political scientists and constitutional scholars would debate these documents for generations." As they spoke, Doctor's computer chimed with an incoming message. Her face went pale as she read the screen, and Sarah immediately moved to look over her shoulder. The message was brief but chilling. "Authentication complete. Buyers confirmed. Transfer tonight or consequences follow." "Who is that from?" Sarah demanded. "I don't know their real names," Doctor replied, her voice shaking. "After was killed, I was contacted by people claiming to represent his business associates. They said they would ensure my safety if I completed the authentication process and provided them with high-resolution scans of the documents." Sarah felt the investigation taking another dangerous turn. The murder of Blackwood had apparently attracted the attention of international criminal networks that dealt in stolen historical artifacts. Doctor had become trapped between her academic obsessions and forces far more dangerous than she had anticipated. "They're coming here tonight," Doctor continued. "They want digital copies of the documents and don't seem to care about their historical significance. To them, these are just commodities to be sold to the highest bidder. Sir Edmund immediately contacted his security services colleagues, arranging for additional protection around the research facility. The documents were far too valuable and politically sensitive to allow them to fall into the hands of criminal organizations that might sell them to hostile foreign governments or extremist groups. As darkness fell around the Oxford facility, Sarah found herself coordinating a complex operation that involved not just local police, but also national security agencies concerned about the political implications of the stolen documents. The quiet academic setting had been transformed into a secure compound with armed officers positioned throughout the grounds. Doctor spent the evening providing detailed explanations of her research and the historical significance of each document. Despite her criminal actions, her scholarly expertise was invaluable for understanding what they were protecting. She had devoted years to understanding the context and implications of Charles I's final writings, and her analysis was crucial for determining how the documents should be handled. "The tragedy," she said as they waited for whatever confrontation the night might bring, "is that these documents should be in a proper archive where scholars could study them safely. They represent an irreplaceable window into one of the most crucial periods in British history." The confrontation came just after midnight, when motion sensors detected vehicles approaching through the wooded grounds surrounding the manor house. 3 black sedans arrived simultaneously, positioning themselves to block the main access roads. Professional surveillance cameras captured figures in dark clothing emerging from the vehicles, armed and moving with military precision. Sarah coordinated the police response from the command center established in Doctor's study, watching through thermal imaging as the intruders attempted to penetrate the security perimeter. These were clearly not ordinary criminals, but sophisticated operators with professional equipment and tactical training. The standoff lasted nearly 2 hours, with the intruders testing various approaches to the building while police negotiators attempted to establish communication. Finally, a single figure approached under a white flag, requesting to speak with whoever was in charge of the documents. Sarah met the individual at a secure checkpoint, accompanied by armed officers and surveillance equipment. The man who faced her was unremarkable in appearance, middle-aged, well-dressed, speaking with a slight accent that suggested Eastern European origins. "I represent certain parties interested in acquiring specific historical items," he said with business-like directness. "We understand that authentication has been completed and that the items are ready for transfer." "The documents are evidence in a criminal investigation," Sarah replied firmly. "They're not available for any kind of transfer." The man's expression remained neutral, but Sarah sensed the calculation behind his eyes. "Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. These items were commissioned by our clients, who have invested considerable resources in their acquisition. We're prepared to compensate appropriately for any inconvenience." "Are you offering bribes to police officers?" "I'm simply suggesting that mutually beneficial arrangements might be possible. Our clients have no interest in publicity or political complications. They collect for private appreciation and would ensure the items are preserved appropriately." Sarah realized she was dealing with representatives of the international black market in stolen cultural artifacts, a sophisticated network that operated across national boundaries and had resources that rivaled those of legitimate museums and archives. The negotiation continued for another hour, with the criminal representatives making increasingly specific offers for the documents. They clearly understood the historical significance of what they were seeking and had buyers lined up who were willing to pay extraordinary sums for authentic royal documents. Finally, Sir Edmund intervened with information that ended the standoff definitively. Government legal experts had determined that the documents were covered by specific laws protecting royal heritage, making their sale or transfer a matter of national security. Any attempt to remove them from official custody would be treated as an act against the British state. Faced with this escalation to the level of national security crimes, the criminal representatives without further negotiation. Their vehicles disappeared into the night as quickly as they had arrived, leaving behind only tire tracks and the knowledge that dangerous forces remained interested in the stolen documents. Dawn broke over the Oxford countryside to reveal that the immediate crisis had passed, but the larger questions raised by the investigation remained unresolved. Doctor was taken into custody, facing charges related to the theft, but also the possibility of cooperation with authorities in properly preserving and studying the recovered documents. The documents themselves were carefully transported to secure facilities in London, where government historians and constitutional experts would spend months analyzing their authenticity and implications. Initial examination confirmed Doctor's assessment. These were genuine 17th-century royal documents that could significantly influence scholarly understanding of the English Civil War period. Sarah spent the following weeks completing her investigation and preparing reports that would eventually reach the highest levels of government. The case had evolved from a simple burglary into a complex affair involving international criminal networks, academic obsession, and documents that could influence contemporary political debates about the monarchy's role in British society. Blackwood's murder remained officially unsolved, though intelligence agencies were pursuing leads into the criminal networks that had attempted to acquire the stolen documents. Doctor's cooperation with authorities provided valuable information about how the international market in stolen cultural artifacts operated, potentially helping to prevent similar crimes in the future. The Venetian chalice itself presented a conservation challenge. The fragments were carefully preserved, and experts debated whether attempting restoration was worthwhile or whether the artifact's historical value lay precisely in its state, as evidence of the dramatic events surrounding the hidden documents. For Sarah, the case represented a career milestone that had expanded her understanding of how historical crimes could intersect with contemporary security concerns. The investigation had taken her from a quiet country estate to the heart of debates about constitutional law, royal authority, and the proper preservation of cultural heritage. Months later, as scholarly articles began appearing about the authenticated documents, Sarah reflected on the complex motivations that had driven the various participants in the affair. Doctor's academic passion, Blackwood's commercial interests, and the criminal network's profit motives had all collided around artifacts that represented far more than their monetary value. The documents themselves remained classified, while government experts determined how much of their content could be made public without creating political complications. The balance between historical transparency and contemporary stability proved to be as delicate as the preservation of the ancient parchments themselves. In her final report, Sarah noted that the case demonstrated the ongoing relevance of historical artifacts in contemporary society. The 350-year-old documents had attracted criminal attention, sparked academic obsession, and raised questions about royal authority that remained politically sensitive in the modern era. The investigation had revealed not just a complex criminal conspiracy, but also the enduring power of historical documents to influence contemporary debates about power, legitimacy, and the nature of constitutional government. In protecting Charles I's final testament, they had also protected the integrity of scholarly inquiry and the principle that cultural heritage belonged to the public rather than to private collectors willing to pay any price for exclusive possession. The case file was officially closed, but Sarah knew that the questions it had raised about the relationship between historical truth and political stability would continue to challenge scholars, government officials, and law enforcement agencies for years to come.